there is an incident in John chapter 11 which speaks to the heart of your question. It's the famous story of Mary, Martha, and Lazarus, a little nuclear family of three. Lazarus gets very ill. The sisters send a message to Jesus, and the message states, Lord, the one you love is ill. They didn't even ask him to come because they assumed that because he loved them, he would do something. Now, there's problem number one, and it speaks right into our age. If there is a God of love, why doesn't he do something? The man dies, and Jesus eventually comes, and Martha meets him, possibly in the graveyard, and challenges him and said, Lord, if you'd been here, my brother would not have died. And that's an interesting comment. She didn't doubt his power, but she did not believe that he could do it at a distance. And it was his social distance, if I might put it that way, that caused the problem. And he immediately replied and said, your brother shall rise again, which is wonderfully encouraging. He didn't just say Lazarus will rise again, but your brother. In other words, what Christ does for people ultimately is to offer them the ongoing, at some dimension, of the relationships they've enjoyed on earth. Now, that's a wonderful promise, but we'll not go into it now. There ensued a discussion, an intellectual discussion between Jesus and Martha about the resurrection. And then she remembered her sister, who was sitting at home, utterly distraught, Mary. And Mary comes out and says exactly the same thing to Jesus. Lord, if you'd been here, my brother would not have died. So here are two people asking exactly the same question, but they didn't get the same answer, because Mary immediately broke down weeping. And Jesus stood there and he saw what death does to a little family. And as he watched her weep, he wept and his tears mingled with her. Now, that tells me a huge amount about the heart of God. There are many people perhaps listening to us, and what they long for is a hug or a touch. Just imagine not being able to kiss a loved one goodbye in hospital. I mean, it's very hard to take that in. And this incident in the life of Jesus shows us the depth of God's heart, that these deaths mean something to him. And yet, in the background, he allowed the man to die. And what happened next is very dramatic, but it's very important. Jesus asked to be taken to the grave. Martha thought, this is ridiculous. It'll be embarrassing because his body will have started to decompose. And he said, look, didn't I tell you that if you believed, you see the glory of God? And he calls out with a loud voice, Lazarus, come out of there. And the dead man came out. Now, it seems to me that's a microcosm of what one day will happen for those who trust Christ. He will speak and the dead will be raised.